Thank you. Hello, friends. Good to be with you. Hi. This is I love coming here. It's such a lovely community, and it was so powerful even before lockdown. But of course, when none of us were able to go anywhere, it became such a lifeline, and it still is for so many of us, whether it's because we're living in remote places from Dharma centers, or we're tired, or we're sick, or just caring for other people at home, just made dinner and rushing over to um uh hear some Dharma and practice. And so I just want to say hi, and that, like, I love that you're here. I know in many places in the world it's actually a beautiful day. Some places it's rainy and smoky. And yeah, feels like a miracle. All of us want to gather and contemplate a topic like forgiveness, which is not like a super light summer theme. And so I was feeling that as I was, doing my Sunday stuff. I was cleaning my house and, getting ready for the week with my daughter, and, feeling just the feeling reflective, feeling a bit of like anticipation come up, and maybe even heaviness in the heart, and just thinking like, oh yeah, if folks are showing up to do some forgiveness practice today, that means that we really need it, right? And me too. So we're in good company. We're not going to dive right into the center of things. We're going to start with a little compassion practice, because if we're in need of practicing forgiveness, it's probably because we've experienced the hurt of some kind. And the only thing that makes sense when we've experienced hurt is to turn towards it with love. That's the only reaction that makes any sense. So we'll do that first. And then we'll talk a little bit about forgiveness. And I just want to, make a note before we begin that there's no one is going to have to forgive anything by the end of this talk. Okay. So there's going to be no requirement that you let anything go. We're going to explore the landscape of forgiveness. We're going to think about it not as a destination, but as a spectrum of experience, that it's okay if we, dip a pinky toe into, we can take it right back out, and a practice. And then there'll be an option at the end, if you'd like to do another compassion practice, or if you'd like to step into some phrases that might open the way towards forgiveness and open the way towards a spectrum of experience for yourself or for another person. There's an option to do that, but there's absolutely no pressure, So I felt pressured to forgive before. I felt like, when talking about resentment or disappointment or betrayal with teachers, that it's like, oh, if you want to be free, you got to forgive it. And I'm like, that would be great. I would love to do that. It doesn't seem like forgiveness is a matter of will, but we can wish. And the wishing makes it more possible. So that's kind of the approach today. Does that sound okay for folks that I can see you nod or a little hand raise, or yeah, okay, great. Cool. And we'll do a guided practice for a few minutes first. So if you haven't already, just find a way to help your body be comfortable. This is an amends we can make to our own bodies, so that we often put in uncomfortable positions, sometimes for hours at a time, right? So you can use this opportunity to make it right by setting yourself up in a way that feels humane and gentle and respectful of this body and its limitations. So that could be sitting, that could be lying down. You may choose to close your eyes. You may keep them open and soft, certainly away from the screen if possible. And if it's available to you, taking a few deeper breaths to just signal to your system that we're shifting gears a little bit. setting the intention to slow down, to draw the awareness inward, to tend to our inner life. For about 20, 25 minutes. And as we gently land into practice, if you'd like to reflect on your intention for being here today, you might name that to yourself as a way to give you some energy for practice. You might dedicate your practice. Who are you practicing for? What are you practicing for? Thich Nhat Hanh says that when we heal not only ourselves, but our ancestors and our descendants as well. So perhaps remembering those who have come before, those who will come after as part of our why. And let's just spend the first 10, 15 minutes of this practice just landing, really letting our bodies be simple as possible, letting the mind be simple, finding something that is available in your physical experience that feels good to rest your awareness on, and let that be your anchor for your attention. This could be a place where you feel your breath in your body. This could be a place where you feel contact with the floor or the chair or the bed. Could be even anchoring an awareness of sound. There's literally no wrong choice. Turning your awareness to that location in your body that you're choosing to be your anchor, your home base for this experience, and inviting your awareness to rest there. And just receive the sensations as they change. And because we're stopping to practice right in the middle of our lives, you'll notice the mind might go forward or go back or go to the side. And when you notice, just gathering, as if you were gathering flower petals with soft hands, gathering the mind. Steadying, resting, returning to sensation. So practice like this on your own for 10 minutes or so. And just noticing what your mind is noticing and not worrying too much for now about the content, just energetically gathering the mind, settling the mind again, letting this be an act of compassion as well. A mind that is so busy, to teach it how to stay. The gathered mind is a strong mind, it's a powerful mind. Spending just another couple minutes setting our foundation, not a huge effort, nothing heroic, just moment by moment attending to this sensation and the next and the next. And now, having laid the foundations for the mind to kind of gather and settle to some degree, invitation, if it feels okay, to turn your awareness towards your heart. You can use your imagination to turn your awareness there. You could take your hand and actually put it in your heart space if that's available to you. Noticing the sensations that are present in your heart space now. And if there's anything that could be considered suffering, any hurt that you're still experiencing, maybe related to something you intend to forgive, turn your awareness towards that part of you that hurts and give it some love. Say, oh, my dear, I see this suffering. I care about this hurt. May this heart be held in compassion. I see this suffering. I care about this hurt. May this heart be held in compassion. Just offering yourself a few phrases. You can use the ones I just used or ones that feel good to you. Or just holding on your awareness, feeling. And as you consider yourself holding this heart and compassion, consider that there are other beings who are also holding your heart. Perhaps the wisest and brightest of your ancestors, or the earth itself. Perhaps there are beyond human beings, bodhisattvas that you can imagine are holding your heart with you. And we'll just move towards closing the practice by taking a few more deep breaths. Hold this heart and compassion forever, but especially through the rest of this talk. And connect with the wish that all beings everywhere who have experienced heartache, maybe the kind of heartache that you yourself experience, may each of these hearts be held in compassion and held with so much love, so much tenderness. Thank you for your practice. Thanks for being willing to take the slow way in with me. I've had the real blessing to be teaching a lot on the Brahma Viharas, on the Buddha's teachings on heart practices, and have been marveling at the ways that one will open the door for another. And I feel like in my experience, compassion, especially self-compassion, can open the doorway to forgiveness. So, I consider it to be on the spectrum. If forgiveness is not possible, perhaps self-compassion might be. I thought it would be helpful, hopefully for you, but also for me, just in full transparency about why I'm interested in this topic. I'm sure it's no secret to many of you who are teachers of various kinds, that we often are drawn to teach what we need to learn. Truth be told, even as like a longtime practitioner, maybe it's one of the reasons why I became a longtime practitioner. I'm somewhat of a grudge holder. It's hard for me to let go. It takes a while for me to get mad, but once I get mad, I stay mad. I'd like to blame it on the fact that I have a lot of Aries placements in my chart, but I don't really know why. So it's a practice that it's a topic that I've known for a while is a growing edge for me, because it's one that has often kind of like made me recoil a little bit when it's taught. And then about a year ago, I fellow Aries, I know the struggle is real. About a year ago, I separated from my child's father, and it was such a, like, for those of you who've experienced separation, it was a tough experience. It was a humbling experience. It would to really, get that even when people are good people, even when people are like deeply practicing, that doesn't mean a relationship can be saved all the time. It doesn't mean that like, it's always possible to begin again and start fresh. And, as things go, like it really could have been worse. Also it was a wake-up call for me around the necessity of this practice of forgiveness. And by practice of forgiveness, I mean moving in that direction, not necessarily achieving the end goal. I spoke with a friend of mine who some of you may know. He's a yoga teacher and a meditation teacher named Ralph Gates. And he's kind of like my big brother, my spiritual big brother, like cool older cousin. And we hadn't talked in a while. I told him what had happened, that I'd had this breakup. And he was like, oh yeah. He's like, you're in your 40s. It's all about betrayal. I was like, is that a thing? So it may be, that if it wasn't this, it would be something else. It happened to be this, So when there's like big hurt, when there's a big disruption in the heart, it can really wake us up, sometimes literally. I remember reading something that was a beautiful companion to me during this time, a book by the poet Maggie Smith called "You Can Make This Place Beautiful," that she wrote about the breakup of her relationship during the pandemic with her kid's dad. And she talked a lot about like the sleeplessness that comes with heartache, and the kind of like wakefulness of the repetition of how could they do this to me? How could they do this to me? The resentment, right? And resentment, as I understand it, is the etymology of the word literally means to refeel. So that every time the mind revisits a past experience that was hard, it's the thought, but it triggers a refeeling of that old hurt. And there is this feeling like, oh, if I can keep this fresh, I can prevent it from happening again, which is, of course, the delusion of the, sense of self that thinks it can control things by thinking in certain ways. We learn, through experience that it's not true. And resentment, as I understand it, is like a subtle form of hatred, which is one of what the Buddha called the three poisons, or the three energies that obscure the true nature of the heart, which is love and luminosity. And the problem is that, hatred in any form, whether it's resentment or, frustration or irritation or annoyance, it actually binds us to the object of our hatred. in some ways more aggressively than love even does, right? It's like this stuckness that can't let go. And so, one way of thinking about moving towards forgiveness is just out of compassion for ourselves, right? Like, who wants to be stuck in that way? And yet, to say just forgive, it's like, okay, well, that's easy to say. One of the things that I really appreciate about the Buddhist path is that there's such beautiful instructions on how to do that. And that's what I hope we'll really touch on today. In terms of how to define forgiveness, Jack Kornfield, who's many of you probably know, one of my teachers, one of the people who trained me to teach at Spirit Rock, talks about forgiveness as giving up all hope of a better past. Have you guys heard that before? Forgiveness is giving up all hope of a better past. He wrote a book on forgiveness, actually, that I reread, but didn't end up using in this talk. But I used to get so irritated when he would talk about forgiveness, because I was like, there are some things that seem unforgivable. I know, I love him too. I love Jack, just couldn't get down with this, it felt unapproachable to me. It felt so aspirational that it was like so far from where I was, like I do, that was part of the resentment, hoping for a better past, hoping that if I the innocent mind thinking like, well, maybe if I go over this one more time, I can change it. It's like so sweet. And also that's not how it works. I also thought about the kinds of forgiveness that are spoken about in approaches to justice I really respect, like the restorative justice and transformative justice work around how we forgive and make amends and restore relationship and when harm has been caused, often through more like formal practices, not so dissimilar from the ones that are used at like Plum Village, when there's been hurt. I wanted to read a little bit about how Fanya E. Davis, who's Angela Davis's sister, a brilliant lawyer in her own right, who went to law school to defend Angela Davis, who was a member of the Revolutionary Black Panther Party here in the States. And she moved from our kind of criminal justice system into restorative justice, like be a leader and thought leader in this field of restorative justice, and how it is that we in society restore peace without punishments when harm has happened. Right? So here's what she says about this. She says, forgiveness is neither required nor guaranteed in restorative justice, nor is it a determinant of success. Success happens in well-prepared and well-facilitated encounters where persons who have been harmed feel safe enough to freely share their stories and express their needs, and persons causing harm tell the truth, express remorse and responsibility, and offer reparations. Success continues when all participants together fashion a plan to repair harm that is actually carried out. This may or may not lead to forgiveness. Either way, restorative justice has done its job. Right? So I love that she kind of leaves us off the hook. Like, we can have a successful reckoning with harm that doesn't necessarily have to include forgiveness. It's not compulsory. Also, the things that she describes here and the conditions for success, like the person who gets harmed gets to share their story and be heard. The person who harmed, expresses remorse, tells the truth and makes amends. I don't know about you, but that doesn't always happen for me when someone's hurt me, right? They don't always express remorse. They don't always make amends. Yeah, someone's asking about this need. It's Fanya E. Davis, and the book is called The Little Book of Race and Restorative Justice, Black Lives, Healing, and U.S. Social Transformation. So I'll try to remember to put it in the chat too. So we don't always get to have those conditions. I don't have those conditions currently. But I think what's spoken about from the forgiveness from the Buddhist perspective is a little different. And that's part of what just has enabled me to see that like some of my resistance to forgiveness was actually just semantics. You know, I think if we define our terms here in terms of forgiveness from the Buddhist perspective, it's really a form of love. It's not technically within the Brahma Viharas, the 4 qualities of love that the Buddha taught, but modern teachings often teach forgiveness as a part of that set of conditions of love. It reminds me of the passage from the Dhammapada where the Buddha says, hatred never ceases by hatred, but by love alone is healed. This is the ancient and eternal law. Right? So this is one of the kinds of love that can heal hatred. And as I said before, you know, I'm proposing here that forgiveness is not a state that we get to, not just a state that we get to when all the conditions are right, but a spectrum of experience, a path that we can step into and move forward on to the degree that we're ready and to the degree that's appropriate and authentic for us. So one of the ways that I thought we could explore this was actually through the lens of a modern psychotherapist named Esther Perel. Some of you may know her work. She's so sassy. I love her. So sassy and so right on. And she wrote one of her books is called The State of Affairs. And it's about kind of healing after betrayal in a marriage and ways of reacting to betrayal that she outlines. I want to surface here as a way to think about the stages of opening to forgiveness. And she's talking about betrayal specifically, like having an affair within a marriage. But I think that we can think of affairs as not the only way that we experience betrayal, right? A lot of times abandonment can be experienced as betrayal. Disappointment can feel like betrayal, right? I think there's a whole range of harm that can result in having the feeling of having been betrayed that feels very hard to forgive. You know, that whole sense of whenever there's a thought, how could you do this to me? I would say betrayal is the qualities that's alive there, right? And so she talks about these 3, what she thinks is 3 different ways of responding when betrayal happens. One she calls stuck in the past. So this is resentment, right? Re-feeling over and over again the experience. The other she identifies as a survivor, which is like putting it to the side, zipping up the lip, moving forward, never looking back, you know, like keeping the lid on tight. The soldier kind of archetype. And then the third type she calls is transformers, which she says are people who say, you know, this betrayal was one of the worst things that happened to me in my whole life, but it changed me. And I'm grateful for the ways that it helped me grow. So the way Esther Perel talks about them, it's kind of like almost like 3 different options for how to deal with, you know, how to deal with betrayal. I want to suggest that these are all 2 parts of a spectrum, more like, you know, stages of grief in Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's framework, right? That each of these might be healthy stages that are on the way to forgiveness that we can recognize in ourselves, that we can recognize in other people, and that by recognizing them, we can use some of the tools of the Dharma to work with them so that they can not get stuck, but continue to move. So that's how I'm going to share these just a little bit before we do a formal forgiveness practice that comes from a Buddhist teacher that I love. So this first stage or way of experience, and we can say these are somewhat linear, but like the stages of grief, we sometimes dip in and out of them, you know, in the process of like healing from hurt or betrayal. We might, you know, one day have the sense of, wow, I'm grateful for the learnings here. And the next day, you know, it's a stuck in the past day. So it doesn't have to be completely linear, right? But when we think about the first flush of experience after hurt happens, often the response is anger, and often it feels good because it's justified, you know, like, and anger is an energy that's not necessarily bad. It's not the same as hatred, right? Anger can let us know and help us to let other people know that a boundary has been crossed. And that's a very healthy thing. Right? The only issue is that after a while, it takes its toll. Right? We get a little burnt, we get a little crunchy, a little brittle, right? If the fire of anger is going continuously over the long haul. And there can be the sense, as I mentioned before, that like by keeping the anger fresh, by keeping the resentment going, it's a protective strategy against being hurt again, right? If I keep fresh the feeling that I had when this person, hurt me in this way, then I'll make sure it never happens again, right? But even saying that logic, as I can see on some of your faces, like we know that's not actually the best protection. And it's an attempt to protect that actually hurts us. So, we look to the Dharma around how to work with this state when it starts to turn on us and actually keep us imprisoned, is to really start to exercise discipline of mind. Like this is when all of the micro moments of drawing the awareness back to the anchor that you chose comes to our aid, because we sometimes have to literally drag our minds back from wherever it's, doing the instant replay over the slow motion, like in a sports analogy. You're like, and put it back where we choose to pay attention, which is on us and our healing, right? There is, oh gosh, I can't remember the Pali name for it right now. It's the Removal of Distracting Thought Sutta. And it talks about the different ways that when the mind is distracted and obsessed, there's like 5 different techniques it names about cultivating metta, about, substituting the negative thought for a positive thought. The last one that it says is like something like the monk who's having distracting thoughts needs to grit his teeth, ball up his hands and bear down, to keep his mind from going back there, Sometimes it's actually like being, quite disciplined. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Claire. Y'all can pronounce that one for us. I'm just kidding. It's Claire put the name in the chat, and you can look it up on Access to Insight or something. Vitakka, I think it's Vitakka Santana Sutta. So anyway, it's not wrong to set boundaries on the mind. There's only so much we can learn by being aware of the circumstances that led to suffering and the thoughts about the suffering, which is what the resentment is. It's not actually tending to the present moment experience. It's thoughts about the suffering that happened in the past, right? And when that's happening over and over again, the compassionate thing is to drag the mind back to whatever we choose, wherever our feet are, whatever the dish we're eating, whatever the sounds that we're hearing, like dragging it back to the present moment. Sometimes working with a phrase or a mantra can help. I find myself when my mind is really obsessed, going to mantras to Tara or to Kuan Yin. Om Tare Tu Tere Ture Soha. Namo Quan Shiryan Pusa. And just over and over again, there's something about allowing ourselves in moments of suffering and moments of desperation to cry out the names of God, right? Whether or not we think God can hear us, right? It's like the crying out that is healing. And it'll at least keep us from thinking the same thing over and over again. At the very least. Yeah. And of course, all the tools of self-love, the compassion for self, the metta for self. The issue with resentment and with forms of hatred is that it turns our awareness out to the other. And the healing is in turning the awareness back to this one who was hurt. So that's, some thoughts on some medicine for the stuck in the past. The survivor archetype or stage, right, is one that's kind of avoidant and maybe a little dissociative. I think this happens for us when the stages of grief are kind of cut short, in a society where, we're supposed to, get over it already, and like, and certainly in romantic relationships, like, get back out there, whatever that means. I feel like one of the most violent things we can say to ourselves or to each other is like, why aren't you over this yet? It takes the time it takes. But when we shut down the grief process prematurely, it can go into this kind of frozen, stuck, avoidant, won't look at it, hold the lid on it mode. And sometimes that is a useful stage. Sometimes the hurt is just too hot. And we actually, there's a wisdom in the body, mind, and heart that freezes us so that we can wait until it's a little cooler to deal with it, right? Bows to that wisdom. We can't digest it in that moment. But when it becomes a long-term strategy, again, to try to protect ourselves from feeling that too much heartbreak will end us. In those cases, the grief or the rage or the fear or the, whatever the results of that hurt are that are kind of keeping us from being able to forgive, they never get to have their full kind of expression in life that allows them to have their natural ending, just like all conditioned phenomena do, right? Emotions don't last forever. They're conditioned phenomena. If we don't let them live, they can't die. And sometimes the strong emotion is literally what's in the way of us and our forgiveness, right? It's kind of in the pipeline. It needs to be expressed. So, to move past the survival mode, we have to be able to let it in, let it in slowly if we need to, let it in bit by bit. I think ritual can be really helpful for this. Even the ritual of, sitting down on our meditation cushion, the ritual of journaling about it for 10 minutes, setting a time where we get to feel beginning, middle, and end, and then moving on. And our systems start to know that, okay, like every day before we go to sleep, we do this thing, we sit, we journal, we chant, we cry, we set the timer and we cry. And then we pause and we go back to, whatever activity is supposed to come next, kind of normalizing turning towards and letting it out a little at a time, rather than kind of going through life keeping the lid on until we see something that blows it open, and we may be at work, we may be school, we may be with our kids, you know what I mean? Avoidance doesn't really work as a strategy because we can even get triggered by our own thoughts, right? We can try to avoid every romantic song, every like romantic movie, every like, book about like family dynamics. We can try to like avoid the things that are, we think might hurt us, and then our own thoughts will go ahead and trigger us, so there's no place to completely avoid experience. But, as Jane says, we can titrate. Sometimes it's called pendulation, dipping in and knowing that we know how to get out. There's this book that I was thinking about with this. I don't know if I have time to talk about this. I guess I'll just really briefly mention my daughter's 2.5, and there's this book that she really likes called The Grumpy Monkey, where the whole premise of the book is that this monkey wakes up and is grumpy, and he doesn't know why he's grumpy, and all the different animals in the forest are like telling him the things he should do to stop being grumpy, like, oh, you should smile, you should, lift your eyes, you should stop hunching your shoulders. You should, you should take a nap. You should eat old meat, says the marabou. Like, you should take a splash in the ocean, says the rhinoceros, right? So, the idea is that like he just doesn't know why he's grumpy, and until his friend Norman, who's a gorilla, sits next to him and says like, I'm grumpy too, and sometimes we just need to be grumpy, does he start to feel like a little better, right? So my kid's been really into that book for a while, but the thing that she's picked up on now, which is a small part of this book, is that the reason why Norman gets grumpy at the end, the grumpy monkey just wakes up grumpy. We don't know why he's grumpy. He wakes up and he's like, ugh, the sky is too bright. The bananas are too sweet. Nothing's right, and just stays like that kind of throughout the book. At the very end, starts to feel better. Norman gets grumpy because he danced with a porcupine and got quills stuck in his butt. And so, my child, it became really fixated on those couple of pages. She's like, let's look at Norman with the quills in his butt. And she was really upset. She didn't want that. So one page, I should have brought it up, but one page, it shows Norman with the quills in his butt. The next page, he's sitting next to the grumpy monkey and he has some Band-Aids over his butt where the quills were. And she didn't want us to turn the page because she was like, it's going to hurt when Norman takes the quills out of his butt. And I was like, yes, that's true. It's going to hurt when he takes the quills out of his butt. And look, the next page, like he's starting to feel better, And I think that that's part of the like lesson of the survivor mode, is like, it does hurt when we turn towards what we've been avoiding. And also like turning towards is part of how we remove the poison that allows the healing to start to roll. So shout out to Maple for teaching me that. The next phase that Esther Perel suggests, but I'll argue this is like another, all of these are stages on the process of healing, on the process of forgiveness, even being stuck in the past, even being frozen in survivor mode. But she says that eventually it's possible to relate to experience of hurt, to relate to resentment, whatever it may be, from, a job, from a family dynamic, from a neighbor, or, from society and injustice, that it's possible to develop a new relationship to the experience in a way that helps us to heal and grow. And that may be not the path that we wanted. Certainly it's not the path that I want for any of you or for myself, but that we're able to meet the experience that we had, good, bad, ugly, and mine it for Dharma. And I don't know about you, but I've never felt closer to the Dharma than in times when I'm raw from heartbreak. There is the kind of arising of the sense of self, the one who was hurt, that ultimately gives way to the understanding of not self, that like another person's actions are their responsibility. And even if it feels like it's about us, it's not. The Dharma of addressing shame, the idea that I could have known better, I should have known better, right? That somehow this is my fault. Right? And starting to see through that thought, right? Oh, it's not actually true. How could we know? It's the Dharma of moving through blame. That this person, is the one who hurt, and I'm the one who was hurt, and that's it. I'll say some kinds of harm, the person who, is experiencing the harm, the person who was hurt doesn't actually have a part in, abuse, acts of violence. It's not useful to consider like, what was my part in that? There's no part. No one is allowed to abuse or to hurt us. And also, sometimes that dynamics are complex, and there may have been a way that I participated that I get some freedom from actually owning up to. There's the dharma of accepting that life is like somewhat out of our control and that we can continue to live and love anyway. Starting to develop, as we see ourselves continuing to live and show up for ourselves, for our work, for our families, for our kids, day after day, even when it's hard, that we learn we can trust ourselves, trust that we can meet what comes. And there's a dharma too in acknowledging the ways that while for the things that we are having difficulty forgiving, it is probably true that another person or people really messed up. And acknowledging that in our lives, there are times when we too have really messed up. That acknowledgement of our own missteps can be a doorway into forgiveness. We do not want to be judged for our worst. I certainly don't. And so is it possible to be able to cease to objectify the person who hurt us and not judge them for only their worst behavior, but to see them as a whole person the way we would want to be seen? And I feel like this stage, this transformative moment, whether it's a stage that we get to or a moment that we cycle through in the cycling around kind of like moving out of hurt and towards forgiveness, like that's the place where I feel like we can start to offer forgiveness freely and from an open heart. Human to human. I heard a Dharma teacher say recently, and I wish I knew who, if anyone here knows, please help me attribute them properly. But they said something like dukkha, that we often describe as suffering. Dukkha is the human tendency to mess things up. We all experience it. And so human who messes things up sometimes to human who messed things up most recently, can we offer that recognition? This is not all of who you are. So I don't know that I have a tight definition for what forgiveness is. I know what forgiveness is not. I know forgiveness is not excusing inexcusable behavior. I know it's not bypassing. We often have to go through some stuckness and some survival mode to get to a place where forgiveness is possible, to a place where we genuinely have any kind of wisdom available to us, and that's okay. Shira Hassan, she's a transformative justice facilitator, talks about, she says, no one experiences violence for the first time by committing it. No one experiences violence for the first time by committing it. So, the definition of victim is someone who is hurt. Hurt people continue to hurt people. And we can start to see that can be also a way into starting to forgive. Like, this is a person who was hurt, and they probably acted really unskillfully. And they too, deserve compassion. We can wish for that, feeling that eventually. And to start to forgive ourselves for, maybe not like acting in our best interest, or not heeding the signs until it was too late, or not, seeing the red flags, or not standing up for ourselves earlier. When you forgive another person, you don't have to reconcile with them, but with ourselves, we do. We have to live with ourselves. Right? And so that's part of the practice too. So really, like, I was reading this book that I'm actually not going to talk about anything that's in the book, but just the title. It's called 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. Have you guys seen this book? It's a really great book. It's like an anti-productivity book. None of it, the contents of the book are relevant to this talk except the title, which is 4,000 weeks. That's how long we get to live. That's how many weeks we have in a life, roughly, right? And some of us have already lived, some of those weeks. So part of what, has been occurring to me, like I'm pretty squarely midlife at this moment, is like, okay, this is life. This is the amount of time I have. Like, how do I wish to live it? And to see that when I'm carrying a past hurt, when I'm reliving it again and again, or holding myself so rigidly, I won't even turn to look, that I remain defined by this event that happened sometime in the past or a series of events. And it does something limiting to my sense of time and life, right? Where everything is a reference back to this thing that happened before. And so that, when we think about the Buddhist path as one of liberation through letting go into forgiveness is this freedom to move, wanting for ourselves, wanting for other people, to freedom to move through this precious life unburdened, and available to the here and now, as opposed to kind of in a wheel of reacting to past experience. And I said before, we can't, will ourselves to forgive, but we can wish for forgiveness. And the wishing is actually just as good. So I know I'm going a little bit into the Q&A, but I just want to offer a very brief forgiveness practice. I say brief because it's not the same as like a shamatha meditation or even metta, where like we start to gather, momentum and stay with the thing a long time. It's potent medicine. A little goes a long way. So we'll drop in and just see what happens. And always an option, if you prefer to stay with a shamatha practice and just attend to the body sensations, you turn me low for a little while. It's going to be like just 3 or 4 minutes. If you prefer to offer yourself compassion, totally cool. And if you want to try this practice, we're gonna try now. So you don't have to do anything fancy. You can close your eyes if that works for you. You can soften them to the space in front of you. And let's take a couple of deeper breaths. There are a lot of words, so, allowing them to kind of float into the background and bring your experience of your physicality, your senses into the foreground. Taking a moment to tap in to your sense of compassion for yourself, perhaps holding your heart or in your awareness, or even physically, as you reflect on some of the experiences that have come up for you in this discussion. And perhaps reciting a round or two of those phrases. I see this suffering. I care about this pain. May this heart be held in compassion. And then an invitation to bring to mind a person, or maybe it's a group of people with whom who hurt you and who you want to forgive and are having a difficult time forgiving. It does not have to be, please be at choice with what you choose to work with, aware of trauma. It does not have to be the deepest thing. And with respect for your capacity, bring to mind that person or group. You can imagine them kind of across the room from you. Enough space to feel safe. And in this moment, using your wisdom eyes to see them in their humanity, the bad parts, and also, for some people, the good parts. Aware that this is a person who themselves in their life has been hurt or feels hurt, and offering them a phrase if it feels okay. I see your suffering. May your suffering be held in compassion. And then if it feels okay, offering them these phrases. This is from the teacher Eric Kolvig. You can imagine sending a beam of light from your heart to theirs, or offering them kind of a flower with each of these phrases across the room. I recognize that you are imperfect. I accept that you have made mistakes. I acknowledge that you are still a learner, still learning life's lessons, and seeing them receive these wishes from you. In this moment, I forgive you as best I am able. If I cannot forgive you now, may I forgive you sometime in the future. And just seeing them receive those phrases, feel your wish for forgiveness, and allow the image of them to kind of dissolve. You can say goodbye in whatever way feels meaningful for you, and take a couple of deep breaths. And as you do, turn your awareness to your own heart, and any acknowledgement that has come up about ways you may have made mistakes or harmed others or missed the mark. And to your own heart, offering the same phrases. I recognize that I am imperfect. I allow myself to make mistakes. I allow myself to be a learner, still learning life's lessons. I forgive myself. If I cannot forgive myself now, may I forgive myself sometime in the future. And seeing yourself really receive and integrate those phrases, integrate those wishes for forgiveness. Take a couple deeper breaths. And when you're ready, go ahead and lift your eyes open, lift your gaze, just take a look around the room, really be present to your current surroundings. See if you can name 5 things you see in your room, where you are now: yoga mat, pink flower, doorknob, whatever it is. I'll put these phrases in the chat in case you want to reference them later. And then that's it from me. I'd love to hear from you how you're working with forgiveness, anything that's come up for you in this talk. You can you send a private chat, or you can come off mute and share. Love to hear from you. Thank you for your attention. Yeah, let's take Victoria, and then I'm getting a couple of private messages, so we'll kind of go back and forth. Victoria Martino, can you come on in?
Thank you, Kate. Unfortunately, I had to come in late because I had another obligation, but what I heard was so beautiful and riveting. I'm going to definitely be revisiting the recording. I have a question, and I hope it's, I want to leave time for all the people that are asking specific questions about this, but I wanted to ask you, I know from your biography that you were in dance and then performance studies. And my daughter happens to like be in parallel to that. And because of multiple losses and traumas in her young life, and which of course I've shared because it's the same family, she has found, at first it was unconscious, and then she's dedicated her creative work and life to helping create safe containers for people to process grief and suffering. And she also has a degree in psychology as well. But she's trying to use art to sort of rethink, because in our society it's so taboo to grieve and to suffer, and she's already experienced tremendous loss as a young child, and going forward it's just been her what's happened in her life. And I just wondered if you could speak for a moment to that that idea of like how the arts and creativity can, I mean, if you feel that in yourself, because I see, I mean, it's obviously a big part of you, which we're not experiencing, today in the sense of like a performance or something like that. But it's obviously inside of you and informing everything that you're saying and living. So I just wondered if you could say a few things about that, if there's time. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question. And it sounds so great to hear about your daughter's path. And yeah, when you said like not today, I was like, oh yeah, I could still do like an interpretive dancer, but no, I will not. But as you were talking, I was thinking of one of my teachers who really taught me a lot about integrating the body and performance and Dharma. Her name is Arowana Hayashi, and she talks about like the space of performance and theater in its most sacred roots as as part of religious and spiritual practice, and like in its origins really being a frame for seeing things in a different way, and especially for making what's typically invisible visible.
Beautiful.
And I feel like I love that what you said about like that there aren't necessarily those spaces in daily life where we can make, and where it's socially acceptable to make what's inside visible outside. But that's something that art does. It's something that performance does. And don't we all want to be seen for what's inside, and don't we all want to be known for what's inside? And so, I love that approach, I think it's so effective. And I have heard more people recently talk about themselves as being grief workers. And that's a new thing. Like, I've never heard people talk about that before, like identify as like, I'm a grief worker, people who are like everyone from, like acupuncturists, like herbalists to death doulas. And, certainly individually, we have a lot to grieve. Collectively, we have a lot to grieve. I mean, I hear, in the US, we lost millions of people to COVID-19, and there was never a national response where we all got to cry about it, And so I think, from our individual traumas, also from like the things that we've been through just in the last few years, not to mention the like deep traumas of like colonization and genocide. And, it's like, there's a lot of grief we have to move. And I think that, grief is one of those things that can be in the pipeline that prevent us from forgiveness and reconciliation. And so it just really bows to what your daughter's doing. And sounds like we could all use that kind of support. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna go to, I've received some private messages, so let me look up. Okay, so someone said, how about compassionate boundaries? Yes. Indeed. I love what Prentice Hemphill says about boundaries. This is the used to be the former Healing Justice Director of the Movement for Black Lives, and now is the founder and director of the Embodiment Institute. And Prentice says that boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. Right? So it is a love practice. And boundaries are not only to protect us, but also to protect other people from what from what we do when they cross our boundaries, right? Yeah, so it's really about protecting all of us from harm and the kind of discomfort we're willing to feel on the front end of that, versus waiting and allowing boundaries to be crossed, and then we get hurt, the other person may feel terrible for having hurt us and not meant to. But even if they don't, it's like, being so allowing that we allow someone to behave towards us in a way that doesn't feel good, to encroach on our need for space or our privacy, or to do things that we said were not okay. Like, it's not good for us, but it's also not good for them. It's not good for their karma, or if you're not into karma, it's not good for their self-esteem, right? And so the most compassionate thing is actually to set a limit, even if it doesn't feel good to them in the meantime. And for us, of course, it's an opportunity to practice equanimity, because equanimity is the heart that can tolerate the discomfort of not being able to control how other people feel about what we do. And giving them the dignity of their experience and continuing to love them, even if they don't like what's happening, and even if we don't like that they don't like it. Right? So yes, compassionate boundaries, definitely. Let's take Jane Miller.
I want to be very brief because you have some other private messages, but thank you. I greatly appreciate it. I'm a psychotherapist, and one of the things that I think I see more often than not is, that's my dog, sorry, is the internal dialogue that people have within themselves of very critical negative self-talk. And they really struggle with forgiving themselves for being so, like, they've termed it as, well, one of them turned it, stated, I gotta get rid of my inner Nazi. And really desperately struggling to forgive themselves for repeating what they heard as trauma survivors. And so I'm curious if you have thoughts on that, because you've really talked more about two people involved. And the other comment I want to make is, when we talk about boundaries, really it's an art form. And it's an art form of being compassionate of how to lay those boundaries, because that's really the gift we can give somebody, how we do it through love. And so when I say that, I ended up realizing that my relationship with my mother, who's now 92, was getting just not as healthy as it needed to be, or I wanted it to be. And I don't think she would have been happy to sustain it that way. So I said, Mom, I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm not doing this to hurt you, but I really want us both to take a step back and look at how our history is leaking into our present.
Mhm.
And how can we kind of take some time to figure out ways we can interact without triggering our past all the time, and interacting then as not as loving as we'd like to be toward each other in the present. And I said, I think for me, oh, she said, what do you need? I said, I think I need a break, just a few months where we are not in communication, so I can really work through how I can move forward with this relationship. And I hope you will take the time to do that as well. I asked her what she needed. She told me. We took 3 months off from each other, which was quite beautiful. And I came back to her and I said, I want to make a proposal. I want to have Zoom calls, because then we can see each other. And for me, communication is about being present. And when she's on the phone, she's not present. She's all over the place. So I said, maybe we could meet once or twice a month via Zoom. And she was thrilled. It has changed our relationship completely. It's just like something so simple, but not easy for either. Well, for her, she was struggling, not talking to me, but it was so profound what's happened with us.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
share that.
Beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm glad you all found a restart and the way back to each other. And there is something really transformative about, like, in the setting of boundaries, like, just being able to know and name what we need, and what a beautiful gift we can give other people when we can ask that. And share it. And with the first example you gave, folks in your practice, I'm guessing you're talking about people who have these inner critics that they're associated with, like people who have, like, historically and currently caused them trauma, like oppressive forces like Nazis. Yeah.
Well, no, I guess that was his term for how he talked to himself, but that came from neglect and abandonment and just really some trauma history.
Okay.
But nothing to do with the Nazis. Just to clarify.
I kind of do want to talk about that because I think for those of us who have experienced, horrendous acts of oppression and genocide, like those of us whose ancestors were, decimated by Nazis, or, enslaved, or, there can be well, first of all, like, those are one of some of the things that I was talking about earlier when I said, like, forgiveness isn't always the answer, and like how might we actually I would personally have to be a lot more evolved to really understand, like, how to forgive, certain atrocities like that. I know it's possible. I read things by evolved beings. Like, I just want to be honest that personally, I'm not there yet. What I'll say is that the internalization of those voices and the way that we start to internalize oppression, whether it's anti-Semitism, homophobia, transphobia, misogyny, anti-Blackness, other forms of racism, class-based oppression, that those forces that are external to us, like necessarily, the path is that they become internalized when they're the water we're swimming in, when they're the norms of society, of which many of those are, and that we can start to internally repeat those messages of harm, right?
Mhm.
And so part of it, I think, is disidentifying, like naming, that's not me, that's white supremacy, that's not me, that's anti-Semitism, that's not me, that's, misogyny, or that's like hatred of Asian people, whatever it is. And seeing it, from its roots at the structural level, that's not actually arising from me, it's arising externally to me. And may I forgive myself for having picked up some of those habits, because I didn't mean to. It wasn't something I intended to, right? But it happened. And can I forgive the part of me that has harmed myself, like as a result of being in this society that has also been harmful to me or my people, as a way that I can like start to approach that like spectrum of forgiveness when it comes to those societal harms and injustices. So I know that it wasn't exactly what you asked about, but it felt kind of called to
No, I
respond.
think you did great. And what I'd add is kind of
Oh,
like you
I'm
should have
so sorry. We are actually out of time.
Okay,
So
sorry. Oh, no problem.
it was really wonderful to hear from you. And I want to just, we're actually over time. So just take a brief moment to reflect on our time here today, and the fact that when we come together to work with our hearts in this way, especially with the tough stuff, that it actually creates a great field of benefit that helps not only ourselves, but other people in ways that are sometimes obvious and sometimes mysterious. And so just an invitation to connect with the wish that our practice today might somehow benefit all beings without exception, without discrimination, and connect with the wish that all beings be happy and free, including us. I'd like to pass it over. Thank you so much for your time and attention. And I forgot to mention about Donna. I have the means, it'd be wonderful if you could go to Sangha Live and donate that. There's the link in the chat, and some of it goes to me and some of it goes to Sangha Live, and all of it helps keep this project going.